my father pastored at Bible Baptist in Cortland for many years, and so I would come to the pastors' meetings, and Pastor Buchanan would be here, and we got to be at those meetings, and we got a chance to talk a couple times back then, and have kept in touch kind of online. And Pastor, I don't know if you know this, but you've been an encouragement in my ongoing quest to kind of live more healthfully and exercise more and eat less and all those fun things. So it's been an encouragement and a motivation in that respect, and I appreciate it. Turn with me, if you would, in your Bibles to Acts chapter 16. Excuse me, Acts chapter 16, and we're going to read verses 6 through 10. Acts chapter 16, verses 6 through 10. I'm going to share a little bit from the Word of God, and what I chose this passage because it has, it kind of underscores a theme that we are then going to see a couple times in our prayer, in our presentation here. And the theme is when plans change, okay? Or probably better is when God changes our plans. I'll put that will be the theme. When God changes our plans. And that's going to come up a couple times in our slide presentation, which is why I chose this passage. But let's read Acts 16, verses 6 through 10. They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia and were prevented by the Holy Spirit from speaking the message in Asia. And when they came to Mysia, they tried to get into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So, bypassing Mysia, they came down to Troas. During the night, a vision appeared to Paul, a Macedonian man, standing and pleading with him, "Cross over to Macedonia and help us." After he had seen the vision, we immediately made efforts to set out for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to evangelize them. Now, this is an interesting passage because we have I think it's pivotal in the book of Acts. It's pivotal for a couple of reasons. It's the famous moment in the book of Acts when Luke stops writing in the third person and starts writing in the first person. Up until this point, it's been they did this, they did that, and suddenly, from this point on, it becomes a first-person eyewitness account. Luke is there talking about what happens from here on out through the rest of the book of Acts. So that's one pivotal moment. That's not exactly what we're going to talk about here. What we're talking about here is a change of direction that altered the course, not just of the book of Acts, but altered the course of Christianity. Because Christianity's in its infancy, and Paul and his companions had plans. We're going to go east to Bithynia, to Mysia, to these other places, or they're in Mysia, but to Bithynia and to the east. And God says, no, you can't do that. They were prevented by the Holy Spirit from speaking the message in Asia. Don't go east. Well, then they're at a kind of a loss. Okay, what do we do? And Paul has a revelatory vision of a person in Macedonia, just west, and saying, "Go west, young man. go west." And so Paul goes west. And there's a couple things that I want to point out here about when God changes our plans. And this is going to be brief, and for some of you, it might be something that you already know. Okay, but I find in my life that I need to be reminded of this a lot, like every week at the least. I have to be reminded of this because God changes our plans, and so there's two lessons I think we can learn from this. Number one, when God changes our plans, He doesn't always tell us why. We don't always know immediately why this is happening. God doesn't, we don't understand, we don't have any indication from this text that Paul understood why his plans were changing. He understood why, that God didn't understand why he was prevented from going to Asia, from preaching the gospel in Asia. And another thing the text doesn't tell us, but we can understand that Paul was human. And so Paul is a missionary, and being a missionary, I can understand. You've got these plans, you've got everything going, you've got the plane tickets bought, you've got all the details worked out, and then you can't do it. And that's frustrating. And there's other things that change plans. We're in the middle of COVID, and so that, anybody had their plans changed recently? We're in. My wife and I, Tuesday we have tickets for Portugal, and it's a whole big thing. How are we ending up in Portugal? It's a whole long story that I won't count here, but we're kind of looking forward to that. But if you know international travel, it all depends on that negative COVID test. And there's really, it's a window of time, so you can't plan in advance. So on Monday we're getting a negative, Lord willing, a negative COVID test. Both of us are vaccinated. Both of us have had COVID already, and neither of us have any symptoms. However, there's this thing called the Delta variant, and you never know. So our plan for Portugal is only as good as the COVID test. But when you come to think of it, there's all kinds of other things, that our trip to Portugal depends on that could go wrong between now and then. So it's you have to understand that God is free to change the plans, and He doesn't always tell us why. And that's where trust comes in. The other lesson that we learned from this is that even though we don't know why God changes the plan, God does have a reason for the change. And that also involves trust. Where we say, Lord, I don't understand why this is happening, but you have the plan. And detail, God's plan is better than our plan. So, and that's sometimes hard for us to get in our mind, because we get the idea, well, God, I know what needs to be done here. And I can see so clearly why A, B, and C need to happen in that order. I can see, I can feel, being the missionary in me can feel the Apostle Paul saying, God, Asia, lots of people in Asia that need Christ. Why not Asia? God does have a plan. If you look over in Acts chapter 17, and there were a lot of things that happened, but if you look over, we won't read this all. As I was going through this, I realized in Acts chapter 7, it's where we learn about the Bereans, which, this is fitting. But then after they meet with the Bereans, Paul finds himself in a place called Athens. He's gone west, so he's gone to Macedonia, and he's in Athens, or he's headed to Macedonia, and he's in Athens, which is on the way. And Athens is significant. Athens is like going, it's like being called to New York. It's like being, or to Los Angeles. It's like the cultural center of the world of that time. And the ideas that spread out over the Roman roads throughout the empire, most of them start in Athens. And so this meeting with Paul in Athens is huge. In fact, I'm taking in Brazil, I'm taking some philosophy courses, and I had to, of course, being here, I had to suspend them, but I still keep in touch with my classmates at the university taking the philosophy courses. And they were taking, and I was very jealous because they were taking medieval philosophy, which talks about Thomas Aquinas and some of these other people. But they said their first classes in medieval philosophy were about this text in Acts chapter 17, and where the Apostle Paul is called to the Areopagus, or to Mars Hill, as some versions call it, and there he meets, and you have this epic confrontation between Christianity and Greek philosophy. And Paul has this, and if you look at the end, Paul, I could spend a day talking about just this text, but at the end, verse 32 of chapter 17, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to ridicule him, but others said, we'd like to hear from you again about this." Then Paul left their presence. However, some men joined him and believed, including Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. And so you have this moment when Paul is preaching to the elite of the elite, the cream of the crop of the philosophers, and as is always the case, a good number of them are going to reject Christ, but a couple of them believed, based on his testimony there at that moment. And so, and I don't know if Paul made the connection, but at that moment he probably did. But I can imagine the light dawning. Oh, this is why we weren't supposed to go to Asia. Oh, this is why. And those are good moments. Those are good moments, and we've had this. We're going to share a couple of those, but it's like, oh, God, this is why you changed the plans. This is why I wasn't allowed to do this. This is why my health kept me home. This is what I was supposed to be doing. Wow. Yeah, your plan was better than mine. God graciously gives us those moments. But I want to talk to you also about, turn with me to a passage, which I'm sure you know, Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to go to verse 13. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 13. And he's just mentioned a bunch of people in the Old Testament, and he says, "All these died in faith without having received the promises. But they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. All these died in faith without having received the promises." Now, this is talking about the Old Testament patriarch and the promise of Christ, and I understand what it's saying here, that we live in New Testament times and we see the promise. We have the promise and we have received. We look back on the finished work of Christ, that they will look forward on the work that Christ would do. I understand what it's talking about here, but the point that I want to make out here is that they died without having received the promise. And it is possible that when our plans change, and God can change our plans radically, and it is possible that we won't get the answer in this life. And sometimes I think faith involves not needing the answer right away. Faith involves not needing the answer. Saying, "Okay, God, you know what? I might get an answer about this. I might get a partial answer about this, or I might not. But your plan is the best." And so that's what we're going to go with. And I got to tell you, I wish that I could consistently have that attitude. I really do. I have to confess that I don't. But with the help of the Holy Spirit and the last several years on the mission field, God has consistently given me opportunities to develop that. Let's say that. And if I hear some of your testimonies correctly, I think maybe that God is giving all of us the opportunities to learn that and develop that in our lives. I want to talk a little bit about what we do in Brazil and give you kind of a overview of our ministry. And I hope this will be encouraging to you of how God is working. And I'm going to be stepping back and forth here. I guess I'm on this microphone, so that won't matter. Okay, so this is our family. You've met my wife. My wife's name is Itaciara. Okay, if you can't, it's a native Brazilian name, and if you can't wrap your tongue around that, then people here in the U.S. call her Tassi, which is a lot easier. So, but So that she is Brazilian, and I won't go into how that whole thing happened, but God has blessed me exceeding abundantly above that which I asked or thought. Let me leave it at that. And then we have two boys, and our oldest son is Michael. Michael is 20. Michael got to spend this summer working as a counselor at Camp Lamoka, and Itaciara and I are preparing ourselves psychologically to leave him in the United States when we go back for our 4th term in Brazil already. So and he's excited about going to college and looking to get into the field of graphic arts. Our second son, Nathaniel, is 14 years old, and so he'll be going back to Brazil with us. They're staying with friends now because we're leaving right from here afterwards to go to Long Island and hopefully Portugal. So that's our family, and we live in the city of São Luís, work in which is the capital of the state of Maranhão. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. The city of São Luís sits on an island. Later on, I'll have a map that'll show kind of how it's an island, how it's surrounded on all sides by water. But the top red dot in this slide is our home, and the bottom red dot is our church where we worked, where we've been working since 2012. The main city you can see is over to the left of the map. We live kind of in a bedroom community called Basalumiá, but it's considered part of the urban area of São Luís. It's a city of over 1 million people. We participate in a group of churches called the Regular Baptist Churches of Brazil, and our association of churches has 5 congregations within the metropolitan area of São Luís, and that's the only 5 churches within our state too. The state of Maranhão has about 7 million people, and it's roughly the size of Nicaragua. So there's a lot of work to be done in the capital city. There's also a lot of work to be done in the interior of Brazil. So God has given us a beautiful piece of real estate to work on, to work in, the state of Maranhão. And let me just hasten to say that God has also given you a beautiful piece of real estate. I grew up in upstate New York over in the Corning area, and every time I come back, I drive through and I'm here, how did I miss this when I was growing up? And now with the trees turning and everything, this is a lovely, lovely area for about 6 months out of the year. These are pictures we took. This was at our 20th wedding anniversary, the middle one there, and that's us in that kayak to give you kind of an idea of how big those waterfalls are. That's toward the western part of our state. This is only 4 hours from our house. This is the Lençóis Maranhenses. It's an area of just extended sand dunes, and it rains and the water collects in pools, and you can run down the dunes and jump into the pools, and it's lovely. If any of you have ever seen any of the Marvel movies, usually when I'm speaking to kids, their attention perks right up. There were 2 scenes in 2 of those movies that were filmed right there. And so we got visited with some Hollywood, so not us personally, but I mean our area got visits. It was all hush-hush, and nobody was supposed to know about it. Everybody knew about it. They were filming on these dunes. So we have the city of São Luís, which is it's a unique city in Brazil, in that it was the only city in Brazil to be founded by a Protestant. One of the capital cities, the only capital city to be founded by a Protestant. It was founded in 1612 by a French Huguenot named Daniel de Latouche. And his idea was to start a French colony where the Huguenots would be free to worship. And that his plans changed. and he got kicked out by the Portuguese and spent several years in a Portuguese jail until King James I, of England, who was a Protestant, negotiated his release as part of a treaty with Portugal, and it was a whole big story. But the upshot of it was the Portuguese took over, but they kept the name Saint Louis, São Luís, which is named after the French king of the same name. For the last 12 years, like I said, we've been working at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. This is a picture of our building. Closer to me, to the right, is the Sunday school rooms, and up on top is the pastor's apartment. And we'll talk a little bit about the pastor that's living there in a bit. But on the right, we have what will be, when the buildings are all finished, that will be the auditorium. Right now we have the tent to keep the rain off, and we were using modified Sunday school rooms, and the church grew to the point where they could not use those Sunday school rooms. So we met outside, and for half the year that works great without any covering. And then for the other half of the year we get the monsoons, and so we had to put the covering. But they've actually done some work. I don't have an updated picture, but they've done some work, and that front looks actually a lot better now. This is, of course, that's the physical plan. This is the actual church. These are our people. We have a very close-knit group, and we don't have testimony time every Sunday, but we do frequently, and they're as much of a blessing as this was here, sharing and it reminded us of our, the sharing and sharing of our lives and so on. It reminded us of our little congregation there in Brazil. One of the biggest blessings that happened over the last term, we spent 2 terms, we started in 2012 there. So the biggest blessing was when we returned in 2017 for our previous term. This young man, Francivaldo, was just finishing seminary. And we had sent him to Bible college with the idea that he would come back. And that's always a risk, because sometimes you send them to Bible college and they get invited somewhere else. But Francivaldo was determined, and he came back. And so in 2009, I get these years mixed up. 2020, he was my associate pastor from 2017 until 2020. The beginning of 2020, he and I switched roles. And so I became the associate pastor, and he became the pastor. And then at the end of 2020, I stepped aside completely from any pastoral role in the church, and he became the pastor. And that worked so well. It was such a beautiful transition. And now there's something, I have to tell this story. This is probably one of the coolest pictures in our entire presentation. And I'll tell you why. The guy, on the left-hand picture there, those are our deacons putting their hands on in the commissioning service we had for Pastor Francivaldo when he took over as the pastor of the church. This was the end of 2020. The guy in the white shirt, standing behind Pastor Francivaldo, his name is Sidney. Now, back in the 90s, Sidney started a Bible club in a neighborhood where he lived, which is a different neighborhood from our church. But he started this Bible club in the neighborhood where he lived. And the Bible club was for kids, but the idea was to use that as kind of a starting point for a church. And they did. They had a little congregation there for a little while. The Bible club didn't continue, and the church didn't continue. And it was, when I arrived in San Luis, the people who were working there already kind of wrote that off. Oh, we tried that in that neighborhood, it didn't really work, and went nowhere. But in the course of that Bible club that he started, he invited 3 siblings to come, and those 3 siblings got saved. It was 2 sisters and a brother. Today, the 2 sisters are members of our church, and one of them has 2 children who are also members of our church, and the other one is one of our Sunday school teachers, fruit of Sidney's ministry. But then, that was the 2 sisters. The brother is Pastor Francivaldo. So here is this deacon serving now as a deacon to the pastor who he led to Christ. In that work that everybody wrote off as, well, that really didn't go anywhere. It went, at least to this point, it went where God wanted it to go. And that's just, we didn't have anything to do with that. That's just a really cool story of how God worked. So, and then Pastor Francivaldo, for some reason, he was able to make it all the way through Bible college without getting hitched. And so I asked him, how did you do that? He said, I don't know, it just happened. But a few months after he became our associate pastor, he called me one day, hey, Andrew, I think I've met the one. And he had, and so we went and were at their wedding, and now he and Jessica are living in that apartment above the church and doing a fantastic job. We're really excited about what's happening at the church. One of the things that's happening, and this started up just before we left, is the men's ministry. And I have been trying since 2012 to get a dynamic men's ministry going in this church. And so Francivaldo came and said, well, we should try again. I said, all right, let's try again. And they started the men's ministry. And that's the group, and they're doing things every month now and focusing on teaching the men how to be good fathers and good husbands. Because a lot of these guys grew up, it's just like in this country, there's an epidemic of fatherlessness and single moms. And so we're trying to teach these men how to be good fathers and good husbands and spiritual leaders in their homes. And for anywhere from how to have devotions to how to do basic wiring in your house, these kind of things that we teach them. Now here's an interesting interesting study because the next picture was taken on the same day, okay, at the same time. This is the men's ministry, and this is the women's ministry. Okay, can we go back? Yeah, men's ministry, women's ministry. Men's ministry, they're kind of sitting around in a circle, shooting the breeze, talking about this and that. Women's ministry, they're color-coded, all dressed up, decorations that were just for that day. That was it. Food, they had food. Thankfully, they let the men come through later and eat the food that was left. We were grateful for that. But and this women's ministry is going pretty much since day one the church started. So the ladies' ministry, all you have to do is have a group of ladies, in my experience, have a group of ladies in the church and you have some sort of ladies' ministry. That's just the way it happened. That's the way God created our sisters. And so these are the ladies of the Ebenezer Church for whom we are very, very grateful. And Itasiara has been key in that group since day one. She's also been very active in different ministries of the church. These are 3 young people who got saved, and she taught their, what's the word I want to use? Their, here in the U.S., catechism sounds kind of Catholic, doesn't it? I'm not sure, but it's the new members class. So catechism's a good term, but the new members class prior to their baptism. Another blessing we had was this guy, and I wish I could tell you his story. But basically, this man was an enemy of the gospel. I mean, we all are before we were saved, but some people are more active in the cause than others. And this gentleman, his name's Pedro, and he was an enemy of the gospel, and God turned him around. And it was a case of, sometimes you work. And you work, and we prayed, and we prayed for this guy a lot. But you just watch God do the work. And that's basically what happened with this guy. We watched God transform this man. And I had the privilege, there'll be a picture later on, I had the privilege of baptizing him just before we came back for furlough. And that was amazing. So this is the Ebenezer congregation as it looked a couple days before we came back. So there's, I think, a couple people missing in this picture, but that's the most of the people that come and attend our church, either as members or just attending the church. So anyway, be praying for them. But we're very pleased that God allowed us to leave a functioning church, and when we go back, we're not planning on going back to this church because I think we would at this point be superfluous. We would be a distraction, and they're doing so well on their own 2 feet. We do plan to help them to go after offerings and help them raise funds for the building of their auditorium when they're ready to do that. So, but as far as involvement in that church, we're looking for God's leading in another place. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We do work, like I said, with a group of churches in the state of Maranhão, and so we have 5 congregations. 3 of those are fully constituted churches. 2 of them are what we would call church plants here in the U.S. So there's myself with the 5 other pastors, and then a deacon and his wife. In Brazil, they have a National Pastor Appreciation Day. It's a national event, and it's a big deal. So we should import that here, right? It should be, and we go up and our ladies from our churches have this big event, and they call up the pastors, and we get presents. It's great. So they also have a pastor's wives appreciation day, which is hey, your wife's not here. I usually get an amen at that point, but speaking of the pastor's wife, my wife is very active in our association. They often invite her to do vacation Bible school. She has been gifted with a gift of organization that I do not have, and so they call her to organize vacation Bible schools and teach, and kids just kind of gravitate toward her. And so every year she's doing 1 or 2 or 3 vacation Bible schools in our area. And she's also high in demand for ladies' conferences and conferences aimed at teen girls. and has developed some materials that she uses, and she speaks not just in our association, but in other parts of Brazil as well. In fact, many times when we travel, some of you probably remember when John F. Kennedy traveled to France, and then later he said, yes, I am the man that accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris, if you remember that. Well, I know how he felt, because very often I am the man that accompanied Itaciata to whatever city we happen to be at. So anyway, another ministry that we're involved in is a Bible Institute that we've started. The purpose of this Bible Institute is to train lay people, number one, for greater involvement and to strengthen the local churches, and number two, that some of these men might be able in the future to take on pastoral roles. We have plans of starting new churches in different parts of São Luís and different parts of Maranhão. There's no way we can get a vocational pastor for each one of these church plants that we want to do. So the idea is to have bivocational people who've been trained at this institute be able to take those take those ministries. And very exciting. As soon as I get back, I'm going to be doing a church history module. I'm very excited about that. Then we had this little thing called COVID, which you may or may not have heard about. Which forced us in 2020 to go into online ministry. And my son Michael was very instrumental in making that happen, because the technology has passed me. I used to keep up, but it has outpaced me. My son Michael, however, is right on top of it. So he set us up and we were able to do services from our house for the period of time when the Brazilian government just shut everything down. Speaking of our house, one of the big blessings of this term was we were finally able to have our own house. We rented all this time, nothing wrong with renting, except that when we came home on furlough, we'd have to store all our stuff somewhere. And every furlough, we had lost things to mildew and rain and insects. And I lost, 1 year, a good part of my library went in this. And then the next year, my wife lost a good part of her wardrobe, and so it was rough. So God blessed us this time we were able to purchase a piece of property and then build this house. And what you see on the left is how it was. That's what it looked like when we moved into it. And then what you see on the right is how it looks now after my wife got done with it. All of that landscaping, all of that gardening and everything, that's her. So she's done an amazing job. And another reason that we're so grateful for this house is that it allows us to practice hospitality like we've never had before. Hospitality is big in Brazilian culture. And in the little places we've rented before, we've done it, but it hasn't been, easy. And now we purposefully put this big front porch out there so that we could do all kinds of things. And we have a fairly decent sized yard so we can have barbecues. And Brazilians love their barbecues, and these are our pastors getting together for a pastors meeting / barbecue, and at our house. That's on the left, and then we have all kinds of church activities, even mini retreats at our house. Sometimes we'll just call the young people up, hey, this weekend our house, bring food, and everybody brings food, and we put it all together, and we spend a weekend with the kids from the church. So, by the way, let me see. This right here is one of the young ladies that Sydney won to Christ. So I'll just point that out. The other thing we do is we have visits from the U.S. And that happens quite a bit. And that's actually become kind of a big part of our ministry. So we designed our house, the idea we're going to be hosting people from the United States as well. And we do several different kinds of ministries from the United States. For example, churches sometimes have sent their pastor down to visit us. Hint, hint, cough, cough. This is Pastor, I don't know if you know Pastor Brian King. He's not at West Windsor anymore, but he's from one of our supporting churches in Windsor, New York. And they came down, and he was one of the several pastors that have come down and spoken at conferences, spoken at our church, or otherwise edified the field that we have there. And we figure, you know what, this is one of the ways that we can contribute to our particular field and that is bring these guys down who have all kinds of ministerial experience and help them and allow them to minister to our pastors and minister to our churches. I usually try to get the pastors together to pick the guy's brain, and it also gives the pastors here a very good idea of what's going on down there. So it's something we like to do a lot. Another thing we did this past term, we just started it. Oh, by the way, I should point out, in 2020, we had 3 different pastors scheduled to come down. Guess how many came down? 0. Change of plans. Music Week. We had in 2018, we started we did our very first Music Week. This is something that other regions in Brazil, associated with our churches, have done and has been very beneficial. So we decided we're going to do this. There were some people at one of our supporting churches here in upstate New York who were musicians, and just shooting the breeze with them one day, I said, I need some musicians to come down to Brazil to do a Music Week in São Luís. And the lady said, we'll do it. I said, really? Just like that? Yep, count us in. What do we need to do? And so they did. In 2018, they came down, and it was spectacular. It was one of the greatest events most memorable events in all of our time as missionaries. We got them together with a team of Brazilians who are also musically inclined. We organized this big event. Here's the group that came down with the students and did all kinds of things. We did vocal training, training in all kinds of instruments. Everyone that came down had a different skill set. And so all kinds of instruments. We put together a choir. And in fact, if you go on, I'll talk about our website in a bit, but if you go on our website, you'll be able to click, just put in Music Week, and you can see videos of the choir. They did a spectacular job. And then the reason we did this was to kind of raise the level of the music in our churches. And that's what it did. We had churches that started choirs that were actually singing in 2- and 3-part harmony. That was, that's wonderful. And our church started a recorder choir. One of the instruments they taught was the recorder for basic, and so we just kind of took that, bought a few more recorders, and started a recorder choir at Ebenezer. And it was spectacular. There's videos of that on the website as well that you can see. So our plan was to do that every 2 years. So 2018, and the next one would have been in what year? People were planning. They had their schedules all set. They were going to come down, and the team was together in Brazil, and we were making the plans, and it didn't happen. So God changed the plan. Another thing we do is we have youth groups come down, and we do this a lot. By the way, the guy in that white T-shirt there sucking in his gut, that's my brother Daniel. And Daniel is currently finishing up a summer as a flight instructor for missionary pilots in Alaska. And so I'm very excited about what God's doing in his life and some potential that he has there. But anyway, he brought from our sending church in Lakeland, Florida, he brought down the youth group, and we usually try to get the youth groups to the dunes that I showed you earlier. There's lots of stuff to do, 4-wheeling on the dunes, and there's a place called Monkey Island that we visit, and all kinds of fun stuff. But those are interesting, fun things to do. However, we also try to get the youth groups heavily involved in ministry. So we have like a game night with our teens from our church, and it turns out that Uno is the international language. You can play Uno, doesn't matter, and in fact, Brazilians have developed their own special rules to Uno, and Brazilian Uno is a full contact sport. So it's I'm not joking by that. It's a big deal. But then of course the youth group that comes down has an opportunity to minister to our teens, and our teens also minister to the youth group, and so that's a big deal. Then when youth groups come down, we've developed a thing that's an outreach to the community that's unique, and that only youth groups can do. By the way, you said until what time we have?
I think everyone's doing fine. But...
Okay. What time are you usually done? Let me ask that. We talked about this.
I just preach till I'm done.
Okay. I'm looking at this big clock on the wall there. So, all right, well, if people start looking at their watches, then I'll know it's time to, and everybody goes. All right, so the focus of these trips, is the youth group trips, is something we developed called English Day. And English Day is an opportunity, unique opportunity that youth groups from here have to minister to people who would not usually come to our church. Because we send out an invitation. We're going to have a one-day event where people can come and speak English to people who don't speak Portuguese. And people who want to learn English want that kind of opportunity. And short of visiting the United States, they don't get that. And so this is a big deal. And as you can see from the picture, we had this was in 2019, was it? Yeah, 2019. And it was that same group that my brother brought down. It was a big deal. And we do games again, and English instruction, different kind of things in English, activities, all in English. And then we get them all together, and my brother in this instance got the chance to preach the gospel in English with me translating in Portuguese. So it was a huge event. We had one of these scheduled for 2020 in July, and guess what? It didn't happen. So change of plans. Another kind of group that we just started with our camp ministry is we've had a lot more construction going on. And so a group came from Windsor, and they helped us to build our kitchen, which I'll show a little bit later, but this just run through a few pictures of the construction team that came down. I'll talk later about camp and how that's going. But they built the kitchen. They were able to. We started with nothing. We had, this pavilion we had, but they got the walls up to about up that height, and also did some other projects in our bathroom and in the swimming area. And so we didn't have any of those scheduled for 2020. So no plans got changed. But we do have some people, Lord willing, when we get back, who are going to help us with some future projects along those lines. So be in prayer for that. I want to talk a little bit about the camp. When we got to São Luís in 2011, I worked with a man who'd been working there for several years, and I saw that they were having their retreats and activities and so on in places like schools. There were other facilities that were cramped and not comfortable, and I said, "You guys need a camp." And he said, "Yes, I agree. I've been praying about this for a long time." To make a long story short, God provided a piece of property. In fact, here's the map that shows where we live. You can see how São Luís is an island, because the whole that you can see there's that inlet there that surrounds the whole thing with water, and so we have to drive down off the island and around and back up to the camp, and that's about a 2-hour trip to where our property is. So in here, in 2011, we bought this property. There was nothing. There was just the weeds that you see there, the underbrush, basically, with a few palm trees thrown in. And shortly after that, the man who I had begun the camp with, and it was going to be our project, he died. And so all of a sudden it's just me. And that was a change of plans that I did not expect. And I knew nothing about construction. And I came very close to just saying, you know what? God's telling us this is not for us. We're going to sell the property. But we had the property, and so we decided we're going to go with it. And every time we get a little money, we throw it into the camp. And by the end of our first term in São Luís, all we had was a wall and a well. And so we got back in 2017, and God provided, and we did a few things. We leveled the highest point of the camp. We leveled that off, and we were able to build the pavilion that you see there, and the building behind it is our bathrooms. And then the group that I just showed you came down, and they got the kitchen up to about half level, and then through funds that came in, we were able to build the kitchen to the rest of the level. And so what you see there is the kitchen. And the window on the right is like kind of a snack shop area, and you can store things there as well. There's a pantry in the middle. And by the way, this is my wife who not only chose the colors but painted the whole thing by herself. We went and did other things, came back, the kitchen was all painted. And so then one thing I've always been really concerned about is, okay, so the missionary comes, he starts the camp, the missionary leaves, what happens? So we've put together a development team. These are the guys that work with us. Of course, you recognize Itaciara. The guy standing behind me, his name is Luan, and I actually sent him up here to work at Camp Lamoka for a summer, and he came back to Brazil, and his head was overflowing with ideas. So he's our program director. And Pastor Jeandro, with the striped shirt, he's the pastor of one of our area churches. He's my assistant. He's really good with construction and finding the good deals and all this kind of stuff. So he's been very, very helpful. And the guy standing in the back with a mask, his name is Franciello, and he's our infrastructure guy, like grounds and wiring and plumbing and all this kind of stuff. That's his maintenance and repair. That's his responsibility. So, and this group has worked really well, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to develop this more so that when the time comes and I'm no longer involved with the camp, it'll be going. We've been, in 2020, remember I said all of those plans changed, and there was really only one thing we could do, other than our online services and so on. We could still go to the interior, and we could still work on the camp. And so we got together with that development team and said, okay, well, let's plan then. We've never had a big activity. We've been able to build, or we're building at the time, the kitchen and all these other facilities. And so let's plan for November, when hopefully the restrictions will have lifted. Let's plan a retreat. And so we did. We planned a retreat for November, and then we got to work to get the camp in shape for a retreat. And so we worked on the this is our swimming hole area that we have. There's a river that runs behind the camp. So this is our swimming area. It was all, I should have put a before picture after. It was just choked out with weeds. And so we widened it and made it an actual swimming area. We got our trails in shape, trails that go through all the kids that come from the city. They love this because this is different. Put the finishing touches on the kitchen. And what was really cool was to see the people in San Luis, in our churches, kind of get involved in this project. So our Ladies Association, they saved up for the whole year, and they bought us this, just in time for the retreat, this industrial strength oven and stove, that brand new. And they also bought us those, or donated those pots and pans that you see there that we needed to serve big amounts of people. So then, in the middle of COVID, and I'm pretty sure it's the same way here, but COVID was rough on pastors and rough on churches, and rough, how to navigate the different things that went on with the pandemic was kind of rough, and our pastors were feeling it. And so I forget what month was that? Was it July? Somewhere about July, we said, let's get together. And where are we going to get together? Well, we've got this camp. And so we all got with all of our families, and so that's all of the pastors and all of their families right there. And we got together at camp and just had a really blessed time. And that was a watershed moment for our camp ministry, because up until then, it had been Pastor Andrew's camp. Oh, we've got this camp that Pastor Andrew's building. Oh, it's Pastor Andrew's camp there. Or not even, sometimes it wasn't even his camp. Sometimes it was Pastor Andrew's piece of land. It wasn't even camp, it was a piece of land. Well then, after this, they didn't say that anymore. After this was our camp. So that was a big moment that happened. That wouldn't have happened, by the way, had all the other plans happened that we had for 2020. Just point that out. Churches began to use the camp. This is our church, Ebenezer, and this is the baptism that I told you about with Pedro, and I've never had a more enthusiastic person to be baptized than Pedro. It was awesome. And then, in 2020, we had the camp retreat. Now, I need to tell you, we had planned maybe 25, 30 kids. And I had brought a speaker I had invited a speaker from another state in Brazil, a friend of mine. And he said, well, can I bring a few people? That few turned into a busload with another 20. So when it came right down to it, we had about 60 kids for that retreat. And that was a moment. Back in 2011, when we bought the camp, I told people, and they come and, well, this is a nice piece of land, but I mean, there's nothing here. And I said, yeah, but I grew up in camps, and I can look at this, and I can see the kids playing, and I can hear the choruses being sung in the chapel that we don't have yet. But I can hear all of this, and that was in 2011. And fast forward to 2020, and it actually happened. And I remember standing next to Itasiara, and I was not doing a good job at fighting back the tears as the kids stood up for the first time and started singing in chapel in our pavilion that we had built up there. And that was it right there. And that would not have happened had all those other plans that we had happened. In case you didn't notice, I'm tying it back into the theme that we were talking about earlier. God changed our plans, but man, I'm glad he did. And our guy from the U.S. came back, like I said, with his head full of ideas that we sent to the U.S. And so, and of course, you can see some of the activities here. And of course, it's not camp unless you have a bonfire. That's in the Bible, I think, somewhere. So we have the camp bonfire and just an amazing time of edification and encouragement. And it was a real camp retreat happening on our camp. It was great. When we go back to Brazil, so we've left the Ebenezer Church in a good place as a fully functioning church. And so we're not going back to Ebenezer. We're open to other places where God can use us to plant a church. But right now, because of all that happened in 2020, and it's happening now, that development team is running the camp while we're gone, and they just had a church retreat. So our focus is going to be on the camp. And so we're sharing these needs that will help us when we get back to Brazil, help us be able to carry on this ministry. For example, right now, these are the sleeping arrangements at camp. In fact, people, when they ask us, well, where do they sleep at camp? I tell them, well, it's intense. Okay, think about that for a minute. It's intense. That's so one of our, yeah, I'll be here. Anyway, be sure to tip the waiters. When we get back, we want to build dormitories. Now, we started out in April, and I said we need $30,000 and to build this, and God has provided all of those $30,000. So since April. So we are just praising the Lord. I leave this up here because construction always runs over. So if anyone is interested, remembers, how's that camp project going? Go to our website. You might see, well, you know what? We used all the $30,000. We still have some stuff to do. So I leave that up there. We have another urgent need at the camp, and that is there's a piece of property next door that's for sale. And we like to buy it for two reasons. Number one, we could use it. There's a house sitting there. You can see the house there. If you know Brazilian construction, that's a pretty good solid piece of construction there that we can use at camp. And all kinds of land that once it's cleared away and so on can be used for all different kinds of things there in Brazil, there at our camp. That's $20,000 to buy that. And so, I shared that need at a church 2 weeks ago. And a guy comes up and handed me right out, usually it's a check. He handed me a wad of bills that was $250. And so we have 1% of what we need so far. We're very excited about that. And this one, I just wish you'd pray with us. I sold our Fiat sedan that we had, and so we've got that money set aside. And some more has come in, but we really need a pickup truck to take this stuff, take materials back and forth from the capital to the camp. The Fiat just did not work. In fact, I was happy to be able to sell it. I'd have been happy to push it off a cliff. But so we're looking for a truck. My wife, she complained a little bit when I put this truck up there because she said, tell people it doesn't have to be that nice. So that's just representative of a pickup truck, okay? Pray with us about that we're going to finance the rest, what we don't have, but pray that we won't have to finance too much. I've got a table out there, and I've got a couple books that are for sale that I've written. It's fiction. It's missionary fiction. People ask me if this is autobiographical. Not in the least. Not at all. In fact, if you see the picture there, the guy swinging by a rope over the angry natives there, that seldom happens in São Luís, just so you know. The guy who drew the pictures, for some reason, he's a comic book artist in Brazil who's a friend of mine. But people look at that and they think that that's my wife. And if so, we have a problem because that's clearly not me. So, anyway, those are the books, and they're available for $10 a piece, or for today, you can get both of them for $20. So, don't miss that deal. And then finally, this is, by the way, the book, the whole purpose for the books is I wanted to kind of picture missions as adventure, because kids today are bored and out of their skulls, and I've been a lot of things on the mission field, but bored is never one of them. So I just want to kind of show kids that missions is adventures, which is why kind of the Indiana Jones kind of feel to it. So you can keep in touch with us. Our website is andrewcummings.com. I chose that just because it's easier for people to remember. What's Andrew Cummings' website? Oh yes, andrewcummings.com. That's just easy. And then you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those also Andrew Cummings. And you can look us up. And also there's a notebook out there. There's a notepad where you can put your name and email address if you want to receive our updates that we send out. Okay? So thank you so much for letting us share about our ministry. And you had mentioned if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. If not, I know the restaurants get crowded after. Yes?
Why did you end up in Brazil?
Ooh, that's a long story. Yeah. Okay, short. Missionary came to our church when I was 10 and showed slides. That's the short version. And I was 10 years old. Yep. Everything flowed from that slide presentation. Yep. Yep. A lot happened since then, but yes. Good question. Yeah.
My wife and I have a 7-year-old great niece.
Yes.
She already knows she wants to be a missionary.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I was 10, but yeah. And I didn't actually, when I was 10, I didn't want to be a missionary. I just wanted to go to Brazil because I thought that'd be cool. God used that to, yeah. But cool. She's 7 and she knows. That's awesome. Don't let that die.
Yeah, her logic is that she wants everyone to be saved. So.
All right. Well, that's a go with that goal. That's great. Yes. Wonderful. All right. Pastor, thank you so much for inviting us. Oh, sorry.
I have one thing to share with you. You know what fiat?
Yes.
Gary is a car person.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate very much hearing about their ministry. I've been excited just learning about their different ministries through their Facebook and things over the last 20 years. And so this is the first time I've actually heard one of Andrew's presentations. But I've been excited by the different types of activities.